South Carolina has turned the corner as a program, but in this new era of recruiting, is that going to be the next catalyst for sustainable success for South Carolina moving forward? Locked on Gamecock starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. I'm your host, Chris Marlowe. I hope everyone's having a fantastic late Wednesday evening, early Thursday morning, whichever one you are listening to the show on. Thank you so much for making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen each and every day. First and foremost, shout out to our everydayers. Remember, guys, we're a free and available podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You guys heard me talk about this the other day, and now is as good of a time, if not the best time, to join FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to get signed up today. All right, you heard me tease at the top, and let's get into it. And I brought it up even last night during last night's episode, and I'm really excited to talk about it because it's something I've kind of alluded to before, and I was so glad that somebody who has a lot more credibility than me and obviously a lot more time on their hands than me to kind of rank these classes, but putting together the class rankings for the top newcomer classes and this new age of a new era of college football recruiting where you're combining junior college kids, the transfer portal, and high school recruiting, finding out those rankings because it can be all over the place. Texas Tech is a program that ended up with the first or second ranked recruiting class in the transfer portal, depending on where you looked at, not necessarily one that finished super high in their high school recruiting. Others like Alabama, I think, who finished like third in their transfer portal. Georgia, the same way in their high school recruiting rankings, didn't necessarily finish that high in the transfer portal rankings. South Carolina has done a good job of recruiting under Shane Beamer. They have hovered right around what we have talked about over the past however many years, where it seems like they're always constantly between that 18 to 23 range. But the thing about that is that 18 to 23 is fantastic, but that still usually means you're hovering right around 10th in the conference because of how deep SEC teams and programs are when it comes to recruiting rankings. My question that I brought up in the start of the show and that we'll get into is this new era of recruiting. Like, it feels like the program has already turned a corner as a program, but the new era of recruiting where you're combining all these different types and focuses of recruiting, like I said, junior college, high school, and transfer portal, and all of that is becoming all of your newcomers. It kind of feels like, especially with what these rankings from ESPN are telling us, that not only has South Carolina turned the corner, but this combination of all three of those, it might be a situation where that is the catalyst for what makes it sustainable success in Columbia. And here's what I mean by this. Again, you could be great at having one of the top-ranked high school recruiting classes in the country, right? I'm going through it right now, and you look at some of the numbers, right? The team rankings from football recruiting going into the end of the 2025 season. We saw Texas, Georgia, Bama, Oregon, Ohio State. That's your top five. That's kind of what it always is, right? Like it seems like it's always like Georgia, Bama, Texas, Ohio State seem like they have been the top four in recruiting since forever. Then you look at the transfer portal team rankings, and you got Texas Tech, LSU, Ole Miss, Oregon again, and then Miami. Teams like Auburn, Missouri's up there. Rutgers was in the top 8, which is shocking to me. North Carolina at 9. Ohio State all the way down at 10. So my question is this. If you're going to be able to come in and have recruiting classes out of high school, and I brought this up last year, like you really have to start figuring out how you're going to allocate your funds of if you're going to go out and spend millions of dollars on a high school recruiting class, guys, that's a pretty big, scary investment and risky investment to make, because if those kids don't come in and play right away, then what's the investment for? Because then after year one, they can go into the portal and go wherever they want. And especially with former 5-stars, you have seen how much more they will be offered going into the portal because teams get desperate. Teams need a lot of things to replace. And then teams will start throwing out even more money. So if you're making an investment, and I'll put it in simple things like this. There was a player in the SEC this year. I'm not going to say his name or where he went to school, but it was an SEC school that it was a kid that was a 5-star athlete out of high school. He got offered roughly around $500,000 to $600,000 in his NIL deal, all confirmed from his first year. He then didn't play much. He just didn't fit. Like he, was a kid that played quarterback in high school. They wanted to turn to defensive back, all this other stuff. Didn't play a ton his freshman year. Okay. Played for a really good team, top 15 program. Didn't play much his freshman year. Now you go to the end of his freshman year and another SEC school who is notorious against offers him double that transfer. And you saw it especially this year where you had all this influx of cash because of the collective bargaining, revenue sharing, and all this other stuff with like the NIL deals and collectives that have already collected all this money, what they were going to spend. So my point is, if you're a school that's going to spend $500,000, like what is your total budget for each recruiting class, right? And then you're going to put in like this significant amount of money to go get him, which takes away from your allocation that you have in the transfer portal, takes away from your allocation of what you're already going to have in other parts of your recruiting class of high school players and other kids you're going to recruit. If you are putting that money in what can essentially become dead money to a kid that doesn't play and then just takes the check and also then goes and plays somewhere else because they offer more, you have now wasted not only $500,000, but you've wasted a significant amount of your budget for the high school recruiting thing. I think the point, again, I'm trying to make here is the teams and programs that are fiscally responsible for one, especially when they don't have massive amounts of like too big to fail bank accounts like Oregon or something like that, but fiscally responsible for one, but have the correct gauge of, hey, we need to have this much focus on our high school recruiting, this much focus on our transfer portal recruiting, whatever with JUCO, and then go from there. Not only with like who we're recruiting, what positions we're recruiting, where our focus and emphasis needs to be, how many players we want to bring in, make sure we're having player retention. One of the teams that has done a better job than anyone of that has been South Carolina. And so when you talk about this new era of recruiting where so many things factor in, player retention is not something we talked about hardly ever. When you talked about some of the 2000s and 2010s recruiting classes of players that were brought in, it was how many 5-stars you get, how many 4-stars you get. Oh my gosh, they got 5 5-stars and 15 4-stars. Kirby Smart got what? Like that was the main focus. Player retention has never been something that has had to be a focus until now, and now it is. And now guys like Darren Usher and players in that position or people in that position all over the country, they become even more important. But when you look at these rankings from ESPN, it shows you flat out that South Carolina has not only done a better job than most people in the SEC, they've done a better job at that than most people in the country. When we come back from break, we're going to get into the actual rankings themselves, and I will explain where South Carolina falls, why it also is better than over a third, roughly, of the rest of the conference, and, again, why it should be the catalyst for what takes them not only to 1 year success, to multiple years in sustainable success because of how good of a job Shane Beamer has done in this new era of college football recruiting. Before we go to break, I do want to give a quick shout out to our friends at FanDuel. It is time for the NBA playoffs. And guys, if we're being honest, there's quite literally nothing like the NBA playoffs. Tons of fun, tons of action, and tons of action for you to get in on right now at FanDuel. They are in full swing. Every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action than right now. And FanDuel makes it easier than anyone to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have way more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Listen, one of the things I love doing more than anything in the postseason, especially the NBA playoffs, player props. How many total 3-pointers is Buddy Hield going to hit? How many points is Jimmy Butler going to get? How many points is Ant-Man going to get for the Timberwolves? You can bet on all that above, and you can also do it all at your own fingertips at the ease and simplicity of using the FanDuel app or FanDuel.com and being able to bet right at your fingertips, like I said. And if you're new to FanDuel, now's the perfect time to stand up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If your bet wins, you will win $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, that is all for the first part of the show. When we come back, we're going to get into the rankings, find out exactly where South Carolina is, and again, what it means for the future of this program and how ahead of the curve South Carolina is. Locked On Gamecocks continues right after this. Okay, we're back. Welcome back in. And let's just get right into the rankings here, guys. ESPN, like I said, they bring in the top 25 newcomer classes. Now, here's how I want you to view this. Remember, from a standpoint of where the teams where South Carolina usually ranks in like a high school recruiting, it's usually 18 to 23, 18 to 22, which usually ranks around 10th in the SEC because it's always loaded and it's a arms race constantly in the SEC. But this is a combination of all three factors into recruiting. Like I said, junior college, transfer portal, and high school. This is where South Carolina currently ranks there. I brought this up to you guys a few weeks ago. South Carolina ended it with the 247 Sports ranking. They finished 15th in the transfer portal rankings. Brought in 17 players. 6 of them were 4 stars. 11 were 3 stars. We'll get to the player retention thing here in a second. But this is where the combination of that and the newcomer rankings, when you combine that and the high school recruiting class rankings as well, where they ranked. Number 1 was Oregon, 2 was LSU, 3 Auburn, 4 Texas, 5 Texas Tech, 6 Ole Miss, 7 Ohio State, 8 Miami, 9 Michigan, 10 Missouri, and 11 South Carolina. You are not a top 10 team nationally in these rankings. You're 11th, and it's the 6th best class. Why do I keep saying it's a huge deal? Because we always look at high school recruiting. It's become ingrained in us as like college football fans and avid fans that follow this whole thing year round. And recruiting rankings have always been a massive, massive deal to college fans. The number next to it needs to be as low as possible, signifying how high you are on that rankings list. And if we're being clear and objective here, South Carolina has usually hovered, like I said, around the 20s and really hasn't gone up much further than that in recent memory. They finished 18th in the recruiting class rankings for 247 Sports Composite last year, which is one of the best they've had under Beamer. It also was 11th in the SEC. But when you combine that and the portal and everything else, 11th in the country in their newcomer rankings on ESPN. And again, sixth best in the SEC. That's ahead of Georgia, who's 14. That's ahead of Alabama, who's 15. It's ahead of A&M, who's 16. It's ahead of Oklahoma, who's 19. Kentucky, 21. Florida, 23. And other schools like Southern Cal, who was way, way lower. Nebraska, who's put a ton of money, Florida State, Colorado. You are in the same breath as Michigan, Miami, teams that have really good classes, but the thing they also have more than South Carolina, much, much, much deeper bank accounts, pockets, and much bigger bank accounts. We all know the story. Like those two teams combined, Miami and Michigan, they combined, for a fact, I can tell you, spent $16 million on those two quarterbacks they got, Carson Beck and Bryce Underwood. You are right behind them, and you know as well as I do, I don't know exactly what the budget is. I know it's not $16 million. I know it's something close to what Miami spent last year, which was over $20 million on that team that ended up in the Pop-Tart Bowl. So, again, why I think it's such a huge deal, there are teams that are going to spend more money. Maybe Bama and Georgia make more of an emphasis in the transfer portal. Maybe they decide they're gonna figure out how, hey, like Bama lost 41 players in the portal last year. They lost 24 players in the portal this year. Georgia has never lost a ton of players. They started to this year. They lost I think it's between 15 and 20 players, which is the most they've lost, that a substantial amount, and also from players that actually had not only high rankings, but also played significant amounts for them last year. This was the most they were unable to have retention-wise year over year. Maybe those teams will figure it out. I don't know. Maybe other teams like A&M will throw even more money at the situation. But right now, you're ahead of the curve if you're South Carolina. You are ahead of the curve if you're South Carolina. And when you talk about what ESPN has said here, the top impact recruits they have brought in, this is from high school: wide receiver Malik Clark, wide receiver Donovan Murph, wide receiver Brian Rowe, and offensive lineman Shedrick Surratt Jr. This is a quote from here. The Gamecocks knew they needed to elevate their passing game with Lenora Sellers after losing 3 of their top 5 pass catchers from 2024. They did it the traditional way, signing 5 4-star receivers from the high school rank. Clark and Murph are a pair of 6'2" receivers who are prime candidates to emerge. Clark brings size, speed, and tools to step in right away. Murph didn't enroll early, but the Under Armour All-American is a big target with excellent hands, body control, and a knack for the big play. The 5'11" Rowe is slightly built, but he's explosive. On the offensive line, Surratt is a 3-star prospect, impressed during spring practice, and could work his way into the mix at guard. One of the things I'll tell you right now, right off the bat, just from this, it's kind of off topic, but those receivers, we touched on this earlier in the offseason, but I remember doing a show on this last year and talking about the receiving core, and I want to say you had 13, it was like 12 or 13 players on the roster that were going to play receiver, and only 2 or 3 of them were over 6'2". Or like in Harbor, obviously, is one of them. I think Dale Von Campbell is one of the other ones. But you didn't have a ton of pass catchers that were over 6'2" that gave you size. A lot of them were 6 feet and under. You had a lot of guys that kind of fit that little slot position, slot receiver position, like shifty, 6 feet, 5'11", 175, 185 type range. You don't have that anymore. You have over 8 players on this team who are 6'1" and above, or 6 feet and above. So that's huge. The top transfer players you brought in: tight end Jordan Dingle from Kentucky, Russell Faison from Utah State, defensive lineman Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy from A&M, offensive lineman Boaz Stanley, quarterback Brandon Siss from North Carolina State, Sean Murphy at linebacker, and Justin Okoronkwo. How did I mess up the name? I used to know how to do it. Okoronkwo? Yes, Okoronkwo, the kid from Germany who transferred from Alabama. I think Sean Murphy came in from Florida State, previously at Alabama. So it says the Gamecocks also made targeted moves in the portal to fill holes with experience and upside. Dingle, coming from Kentucky, had a strong spring at tight end. His well-rounded skill set should make him a reliable option in both the run and pass game. Up front, Stanley is providing quick returns and has seemingly already won the starting job at center. Both Brownlow-Dindy and Murphy were touted ESPN 300 prospects with a former 5-star in the 2022 class, so each comes in with talent to break out. Siss is also coming off a strong spring. So what I keep going back to is you've brought in a ton of talent, and you've done it almost like in mass at some spots where you need some immediate impacts, but then also in some spots where you're for your high school recruiting, like receiver, you can develop a lot there because you brought in 5 4-star players. I doubt that all 5 of those kids make a significant impact on this year's team outside of raising the floor in terms of competition level and production level, and also competitive level. On defense, we know there's a lot more to replace. I said this on yesterday's show, and I'm not sure if it really hit home or anything like that. But this is a quote also from ESPN, who did another piece on the roster retention. And I'll tease it into the next part of the show, because the roster retention part of this whole thing is as big of a deal. And again, this is a new era of college football, to where just going out, and whether it was under the table or shaking hands above it, bringing in as many 5-stars as possible. That was the whole point. That was the whole focus. It's about the Jimmies and the Joes, not the X's and the O's. Your whole purpose as a coach was, I got to go recruit, bring in as much talent as possible, because if I have more 4 and 5 stars than anyone else on the field, unless my name is Jimbo Fisher, I am most likely going to beat whoever's across the field from me. And that's not the case anymore. It's part of it for sure, But it's also part of, let's go get some great players out of high school. Let's go get some much-needed players for depth and grown-ass men and veterans out of the portal. And let's figure out how to retain as much talent year over year as possible. When we come back, I'm going to tell you the number that South Carolina had that no other team in the country had compared to them in terms of roster retention. We will talk about it as soon as we get back. Locked On Gamecocks continues right after this. All right. The number is 1. I don't know why I held up both hands. That looks like it says 2. The number is 1. And when you talk about roster retention, not only is that where South Carolina ranks in terms of players lost and starts lost, it's also the total number of starts they lost of all their players combined in the portal. They lost 20 players in the transfer portal this year. They lost 1 combined starts. Off the top of my head, I can tell you that the cornerback from North Carolina State, Brendan says, that kid started 9 games last year. So you've already increased your return on investment of what you lost. You're in the black. You're +8. Like, you had 20 players leave the program, 1 combined start of all 20. It sucks to lose players, but in this day and age, being able to bring in key pieces and then also retain those pieces. I started the show off by telling you, man, the biggest concern you have for like what kind of angle and ideology are you going to have going into recruiting moving forward? Is it going to be something like what Kalen DeBoer did his first year, which is like, I want to go heavy into just high school recruiting. Hugh Freeze did the same thing for his first 2 years. And then it was after this year, hey, I want to go heavy into this. I also want to really go heavy in the portal. You don't see a ton of coaches yet have a massive emphasis on both. And I wouldn't even put South Carolina in that necessarily, because I don't think that South Carolina is going in and saying, God, we have got to hit the portal and we have got to get this. We went out and got a running back we needed. Went out and got a defensive lineman that has a huge upside that we needed. Went out and got several linebackers we needed. But and we got a cornerback that's going to elevate our secondary into, again, being one of the better units in the entire in the conference, despite losing what should have been a first-round draft pick at safety, a 3-year starter, and an All-American. There's no part of what South Carolina has done in comparison to other schools. There's nothing that South Carolina has done in recruiting, whether it be high school or the portal, that feels desperate. No part of their attitude, mentality, focus, or ideology of what they're going to do and their plan of going into recruiting feels desperate or we have got to go get someone at this position. I talked about this before. LSU last year, desperate at defensive line. Didn't want to fork over the money for one player in defensive line. They were very thin there. Ended up losing one of their main guys to a torn Achilles. They had one of the worst run defenses in the SEC again. They were desperate for that position. They were desperate again this year. You saw the emphasis they put on. Brian Kelly is in a year where he is desperate to win. There's no feeling of desperation at all over here at South Carolina. This is arguably the most comfortable, confident, at ease this program has felt like it's had, in my opinion, in a decade. You could say 2 years ago you felt really good coming off the November wins against Tennessee and Clemson, but it didn't feel like this. It didn't feel like you had like this level of, I'm good, brother. We got. I mean, if we don't get that kid from Grambling out of the portal that a lot of people are high on because Ole Miss outbids them, I'm fine. We got some other kids we're going to bring in the portal. And we also have a bunch of studs on this roster. This is a quote from ESPN of what they were saying when they talk about evaluating this team. Okay, this is about the roster retention part. South Carolina added a bunch of quality players to its 2 deep via the portal, which should create competition and depth this fall. Faison could become one of the great steals of this portal cycle. The Utah State transfer will still need to get cleared for an extra season of eligibility by the NCAA, but he was one of the best backs in the Mountain West last season, rushing for 1,109 yards and 8 touchdowns. Brownlow Dindy, the number 3 overall recruit in the 2022 ESPN 300, Struggled to break through at A&M, but looks poised to contribute. And Sis was a 9-game starter at NC State last season. Could start as well. The portal class might not yield a high number of plug-and-play starters, but that's arguably a good thing. This team has enough coming back to not be overly reliant on its arrivals. And if I've said it once, I will say it 1,000 more times. No team in the SEC and possibly the country has had a better and more successful hit rate on the players they have evaluated, recruited, and developed out of the portal than Shane Beamer and South Carolina. Point blank, period. So, to wrap all this up, the old way of recruiting was a disadvantage for South Carolina. Being able to go out and whether it was above the table or below the table, go out and try and get as many 5-stars as possible. They didn't have the luxury of going in their own backyard. We talked about that before, how at most you're talking about maybe 6 like blue chip recruits in the state each year. You don't have the luxury of going, around Metro Columbia or down to Charleston or even in the upstate or somewhere in between and being like, oh, this is a hotbed for recruiting. It's just not what the state's ever had. You didn't have the luxury of going into getting 5-star after 5-star after 5-star. You didn't have the luxury of going out and paying a blank ton of money for the top tier transfer portal recruits or anything like that. Like, you were not going to throw $4 million at a quarterback. You're not going to throw $2 million at a lineman. You didn't have a lot of the same luxuries that other teams have had. But what they have done and the structure and the infrastructure and the foundation they have put in place, I said this last year too, they have top 10 facilities. The retention they had on staff, which you rarely see in this day and age in college football, and the retention they had on this roster, all of that is almost as important now as, hey, how many 5-stars you get? How many 4-stars you get? Because now the game has changed to where it doesn't matter how many you got as a freshman, because 3 years from now, there's more often than not across the country, those guys are going to be dressed up in a different uniform. They're going to be enrolled in a different school. They're probably going to be in a different conference. And to be honest, guys, it'll probably be their second or third stop from where they had when you first signed them. So that's why all of these other pieces that go into recruiting now, for the first time really in program history, are favoring South Carolina. And this program and this coaching staff has taken full advantage. And it's the easiest path and the biggest catalyst for why you will have sustainable success in this program. That is all for today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Was very excited about recording this one. Appreciate you guys for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. We'll be back tomorrow with more Locked On Gamecocks, and then we'll be live this weekend from Boston. We'll be recording from there. We won't be a live show, but I'll be recording from a hotel room in Boston. Going to Fenway Park, very excited about it. We'll be covering some other stuff with baseball as well. And we'll talk to you all then. Go Cox.